The Frozen Wilds, Horizon Zero Dawn's first and only DLC expansion, was released on November 7, 2017, a little over 8 months after the release of the base game. It was received favorably by critics, citing it as a wonderful addition to an already exceptional game, with its narrative and new ensemble of characters sharing the stage as its stars, alongside the new, beautiful biome in which it's set. On top of that is a marked improvement in its presentation, both in its side quests, activities, and character interactions, as well as introducing a host of new, incredibly dangerous machines. As mentioned in the last video, I will almost exclusively be focusing on the Frozen Wilds narrative elements in this video, only mentioning gameplay when and where it's applicable, appropriate, or unavoidable as it pertains to the story. Given that its story is considerably shorter, being only a DLC after all, I hope to go into far more detail than I did in the Zero Dawn video while staying far more succinct. Only time will tell if I'm successful in this. A few housekeeping items I want to go over before we dive into this. The Frozen Wilds is set concurrently with the main story of Zero Dawn, becoming available after you reach Day Tower, the proverbial start of Act 2. That said, though Zero Dawn has a hard ending, instead of sending you back to the main menu, it simply sends you back to the start of the second to last main story mission, meaning you are under no obligation to finish the Frozen Wilds before you, in effect, finish the main game. Like any uncompleted side quests and activities, it will be waiting for you. With that in mind, know that for this video, I played the Frozen Wilds after I completed the main story, as has been the case on all my previous playthroughs before this. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, I find the DLC works best narratively with the full knowledge of the main story at your disposal for reference. Secondly, the Frozen Wilds is incredibly difficult by comparison to the main game, with a recommended starting level of 30, though I would wait until you're at least level 40 plus, unless you're on a New Game Plus run. There's also a third reason, but I'm going to save that for later in the video where I believe it'll make more sense. I recommend watching the Zero Dawn video before this one, as I will be referring to it quite a bit. With that said, spoilers for all of the Frozen Wilds, some of Zero Dawn, as well as cutscenes from the Forbidden West. Now wrap yourself in your warmest clothes and grab a hot cup of joe as we follow Aloy on her journey into the Frozen Wilds.
I can't wait, I can't wait, I can't wait!
We begin the Frozen Wilds by speaking to one of 3 NPCs, all of whom are marked by a brand new quest marker that appears once you reach Day Tower and start Act 2 of the main story. One of them, an Oseram named O'Toole, can be found right away in Day Tower. The others are Ravid, a young Karja nobleman we can find along the Way of Broken Stones outside Meridian, and Eureki, a Banuk woman serving as envoy to Sun King Avad's court, though only because no other Banuk would accept the role. Though providing different perspectives, they all more or less similarly describe the region in which the Frozen Wilds takes place, known as the Cut, as well as the situation currently unfolding in the region. New machines are running rampant, far more dangerous than what's found in the south, afflicted by some curse or malevolent spirit. Or miasma, as Ravid puts it.
And the evil miasma?
Who knows what those tent-dwelling savages consider evil? Or a miasma? I just want to hunt!
Though no numbers given, it's inferred that a great many Banuk have been killed as a result. Though O'Toole and Eureki insist against it, Aloy is immediately interested and decides to head north and investigate. Beginning the climb just north of the Grave Hoard, we receive a call over our focus.
What are you doing, Aloy?
Clearly still spying through her focus, Silence is less than impressed by Aloy's decision to gallivant northward, claiming the Banuk have nothing to offer but useless mysticism. What he says is largely dependent on what stage of the main story you're on, but the gist is largely the same, as is Aloy's response.
Surprised you're still checking up on me. I thought you had moved on.
You might have encountered the Banuk on a few occasions in the base game, either out in the open world or during a select few side quests. Among them are some shamans. As is tradition among the Banuk, they've threaded blue cables through their skin so as to contain the blue light of the machines in their bodies, Banuk religion being centered around this blue light. Silence, for some unknown reason, has done this as well, which makes his opposition to Aloy going north, as well as his surly response to Aloy's noted observation of his threaded cables, all the more interesting.
Touchy.
Eventually we come across a frozen pond, and it's here that we come face to face with a Scorcher, one of the new machines we were warned about earlier. It's also marked as demonic, wrapped in purple glowing cables, not unlike the red corruption placed on machines by Hades, a comparison that Aloy can even make a little later on. Though already damaged, the Scorcher can still be quite a challenge, proving that what Aloy heard earlier about these new machines was no joke. Once the Scorcher's out of the way, we continue up the mountain path. Approaching what appears to be some sort of outpost, we receive a rather ominous welcome.
Okay, that's a welcome, I guess.
It's here, as we pass through the mountain's cavernous passage, that we receive our official welcome to the frozen wilds. Once through the passage, where we're greeted by some rather acerbic Banuk, we see that there may be a lot more wrong in the cut than just what we've been told. If you speak to Yoriki before making the trek north, she'll mention a mountain that burns day and night. As we can see, that's quite the understatement, the mountain belching so much black smoke and crackling with so much lightning that it would put Mount Doom to shame. It's also here that we lay our eyes on our new snowbound playground for the first time. This is the aforementioned cut, located south of the Banuk homeland of Banur. Once considered an integral part of Banur itself, it was left ruined and severely depopulated by the Red Raids, the Karja laying it to waste on more than one occasion, thanks in no small part due to its proximity to the Sundom. It's from the war that the region got its name, the land having been cut away by the Karja invaders. What's left is a sort of no man's land where the Banuk maintain their traditional authority, but outlanders, particularly Ostrom traders and some rather brazen Karja hunters, are free to come and go as they please, so long as they don't step on Banuk toes. This has often been the source of some tension, but as being a tribe that tends to keep to themselves, most Banuk simply leave them be, and vice versa. The cut's status as a no man's land is further compounded by just how harsh it is. The region is bound in a sort of forever winter, locked in snow and ice gripped by sub-freezing temperatures, which is more likely to kill the unprepared well before any machine does. It's in this sort of environment that the Banuk thrive, for as we'll discuss later, their entire culture is based around the art of survival, of prevailing against any and all challenges or die trying. What better place to do so than in a land so harsh as the cut? Continuing along, we quickly enter Song's Edge, the largest settlement in the cut, though calling it a settlement is a bit of a stretch, for it's nothing more than a smattering of tents, which is in keeping with the Banuk's semi-nomadic lifestyle. Aloy spots a plume of smoke rising from within the village, and we head to investigate. Following the path snaking through the village, we notice that the entire populace is moving in the same direction, suggesting that something is about to go down. It's here that we're introduced to Bergrand, an Ostrom trader based in Song's Edge who you might have heard mentioned indirectly by O'Toole if you spoke to him to start the DLC. He's our first point of contact in the area, where we can learn more about the Banuk and the present situation unfolding in the cut. Before we can do that, however, we're treated to a cinematic. The big something is in fact a sort of funeral for a large number of Banuk, recently killed during some clash that we haven't learned about yet. Though given what we learned about the dangerous machines and evil spirits, it can be assumed that their deaths are tied to that. As Bergrand tells it, the Banuk usually burn their dead, but not this time around, with Aloy correctly suggesting that this is because the bodies couldn't be recovered. Instead, the Banuk have created effigies, for which some shamans call upon a trio of Glinthawks to swoop down and take away into the sky, which is meant to represent their fallen kinsmen being taken to the revered blue light. It's here that we're introduced to Aratok, a Banuk chieftain who calls upon the gathered hunters to join him in taking up arms against the daemon that's frenzying the machines in the cut. This all but confirms how it is that the slain Banuk were killed, while giving us a name for the curse that we've been told about, the daemon. Aratok's call is met with uproarious support, which draws a wry remark from Bergrand.
It frenzies the machines.
Machines that wiped out their best. And what do they want to do? Go back up there. Fools.
Now we can speak at length with Bergrand, who gives us the lowdown on the situation in the cut, as well as some in-depth information and various optional dialogue paths. As he tells it, a shaman named Aurea showed up to Song's Edge one day, going on about a spirit and daemon residing on Thunder's Drum, the mountain belching smoke and lightning. In turn, Aratok marched their Werak, the term for a Banuk clan, up to the mountain to face the daemon, and lost half of the Werak's hunters in the process. Following this disaster, Aurea inexplicably vanished, at which point Bergrand had hoped old talk of spirits and the daemon would go with her. Instead, as we just saw, Aratok is gearing his hunters up for another foray into Thunder's Drum, against all conceivable common sense, at least according to Bergrand. Like most Ostrom, Bergrand considers any and all superstitious talk to be nonsense, though even he recognizes that the machines are becoming more dangerous, given the hard-to-miss signs.
It could be because of the daemon, or it could be because they all got indigestion, for all I know.
Despite Bergrand's insistence otherwise, Aloy is determined to find out what this daemon is, and its connections to the machines and their behavior. This means she has to find Aurea, though all that anyone knows is that she was last seen heading to the Ice Rasps, the mountain range that forms the western border of the cut. It's here Bergrand suggests seeking out her apprentice Naltuk, who has gone to investigate rumors of a new machine and some sort of mysterious structure, possibly connected to the daemon. With this information we can head off to find Naltuk, but not before having the chance to speak with bossman Aratok himself, and try to get a Banuk perspective on things. I say try because, as Bergrand puts it, he isn't one for much talking.
Well, I guess that's it then.
Good. I prefer deeds to words.
Right.
We do learn a few things though, such as that Aratak was born and raised in the Cut and that he led the defense of the region in the Red Raids. We also get a bit more depth on the Banuk, particularly their belief that there's no worse fate than turning down a challenge.
Even with the risks being so great?
The risk of what? Death? It would be a worse fate to bow our heads to the challenge and say too much.
Following the river north, we eventually find Naltuk, who's watching that. It's the new structure we heard about a short bit ago, some sort of tower surrounded by machines bearing the same purple glow as the Scorcher we fought earlier. According to Naltuk, these machines belong to the Daemon, which has them guarding these towers that are dotted across the Cut. The towers send out a wave-like pulse that can repair these machines, making it necessary to disable them before engaging. On top of this, the pulse can zap your shields if you're wearing the Shield Weaver armor, as well as render your mount inoperable. Aloy immediately asks to know where Aurea is, but as is the Banuk way, Naltuk refuses to say, saying only that she goes where shamans tread, a roundabout way of saying that she's gone where outlanders such as Aloy aren't welcome. Seeing only one way forward, Aloy offers to help stop the Daemon's spread by disabling the tower, though only under the expectation that Naltuk gives her the answers she needs. There are two ways of disabling these towers, either destroying it by shooting an exposed vent, or overriding it, causing the tower to send out an electrical shockwave that briefly disables any nearby machines. Once the tower and the machines are dealt with, Aloy returns to Naltuk, who's more than a little awestruck by what he's just seen, realizing that she should probably in fact meet Aurea and vice versa. He informs us that she's gone somewhere beyond the ice rasps, taking a trail called the Shaman's Path to speak to the voice of the blue light, going into retreat beyond the shrine at its end. We can also ask about what happened at Thunder's Drum. Naltuk wasn't there, but he saw Aurea and Aratak arguing bitterly just before she disappeared into the mountains, suggesting that there's more to Aurea's disappearance than might first appear. Ascending the ice rafts, we find the beginning of the Shaman's Path, nestled deep in the mountains, its entrance lit up with the same fluorescent blue glowing crystal stuff that we saw in the caverns leading to the Cut earlier. Entering the cave, we begin to traverse the path and search for Aurea. The best way I can describe the Shaman's Path is that it's the DLC's take on the Proving and its immediate aftermath from the base game. Of course, gameplay-wise they couldn't be more different, but I find their narrative placements rather similar. They both come after some time spent setting up their stories, coupled with taking some time to get ourselves settled within our new environs. They also have conclusions that add further meaning to already pre-established plot points, or raising new questions that push their stories along. They also, at one point or another, present a secondary threat or antagonist working in tandem with the main antagonist, which we may or may not already have rudimentary knowledge of. The path starts in the aforementioned ice caves with the option of using markers to point us in the right direction. Where markers aren't present, there are wind chimes that emit just enough sound for Aloy's focus to pick up and follow. For such a linear section, it's quite easy to get lost sometimes, and I still found myself having to stop and think for a second before getting myself readjusted and back on the right path. Considering, as I just mentioned, there aren't markers every time there's a convergence of caves, the wind chimes are a rather welcome aid. Eventually we make it back outside, but not before duking it out with two demonic stalkers, a sign that the Daemon's influence has tainted what can be assumed to be an incredibly holy site for the Banuk. The next portion of the path offers new challenges in the form of raising and lowering bridges, made so by waterfalls. There isn't anything very noteworthy about them, it's all just a matter of timing your jumps and crossing when the bridges are in the right position. After the last bridge, the weather takes a considerable turn for the worst, the sun blotted out by dark clouds, snowfall increasing exponentially. It's shortly after, during a nearly failed jump by Aloy, that we catch our first glimpse of yet another new machine, bearing the trappings of demonic possession, only adding further credence to everything we've heard regarding the Daemon's power and influence.
There's definitely something new out here, and I don't think it's friendly.
Further along the path and up a cliff wall, we find a campfire and a bunch of chests full of crafting supplies and potions, a not so subtle suggestion that we might be getting into a bit of a ruckus, if the demonic tower ahead wasn't enough of a hint. Jumping down into the valley, we quickly come face to face with the very machine we caught a glimpse of earlier. A Frostclaw, a very new, very dangerous machine akin to an enormous bear, capable of crushing melee attacks as well as ranged attacks making use of, as its name would suggest, ice. We can either sneak past and continue along the path, or take the Frostclaw on and see how we fare with this new mechanical beast. The tower does complicate things a bit, what with its ability to repair, so it'd be wise to quickly take it out first before handling the Frostclaw. Once we've either taken out the Frostclaw or snuck past it, we finally arrive at the shrine at the end of the path, where we can take a piece of Blue Gleam, just as Naltuk suggested prior to setting off to find Aurea. Blue Gleam is the Frozen Wild's new form of currency, used alongside metal shards to buy the best armor, weapons, and treasure boxes in the DLC, earned by either finding it out in the world or by completing side quests and activities. It also holds some religious value to the Banuk, who believe it to be the revered blue light, frozen by the cold upon being released from dead machines. In reality, however, it's just frozen machine fluid.
Hush, hush.
A shaman's secrets are not spoken aloud.
That said, given its importance both culturally and in terms of trade, it's rather strange it isn't given much more depth beyond this aforementioned bit of lore, which you can only learn of in an optional conversation path with Naltuk. In fact, I don't even think it's brought up again after this, save for when Aloy takes a piece at the aforementioned shrine. Beyond the shrine is an entrance to some old world ruins deep in the mountain where Aurea has gone to. Once inside, we begin to come across a series of data points which begin to tell a story of their own. They introduce us to a couple key characters in this side story: Kenny Chow, Anita Sandoval, and Dodger Blevins. Of these three, Blevins is the least important, but he comes up often enough to be worth mentioning.
Ding the emergency supply order. Try reading it this time, okay? You weasels don't want me calling my people in SLC.
Together, along with many more staff, they worked on a project known as Firebreak back in the 2040s, these ruins, as well as others across the cut, being a part of it. What Firebreak is remains a mystery, though what's mentioned and seen suggests that it was a massive undertaking. We also learned that Kenny and Anita were romantically involved, which I think was meant to make us more emotionally invested in this pre-Pharaoh Plague subplot, but compared to what we learned later on in the story, it kinda falls flat. It's also here that we learn that some data points in the Frozen Wilds are both audio and text-based. They open with a short snippet of audio, which is then expanded on by a chunk of text. Frankly, I'm not a fan of this. I won't go so far as to call it terrible, just that I'm glad that it wasn't carried over into Forbidden West. The Frozen Wilds can be best described as being a sort of testbed for Guerrilla's developers to try new and different things, particularly in its narrative and cinematic design, with the added benefit of having feedback on the base game at their disposal. While the vast majority of the changes are very welcome improvements, the dual audio-text style of a data point isn't. These data points are interesting, but given that players will have been preconditioned by the base game to believe that audio data points are just that, they won't either be bothered to open up the menu and read the text, or won't even realize that there's text to be read, their only announcement being a pop-up once the audio is finished. While the audio snippets offer enough to convey what's being presented, the text portions provide so much more information that, if you miss it, you may be left confused by just what the hell is going on. While the immediate story involving Aloy isn't affected by this, thank God, if you're even the remotely interested in this old world subplot, then you run the risk of being rather confused by the end of it. Along the way, we come across the DLC's first puzzle door, but these aren't like the ones found in the base game. Whereas in the base game you merely turn dials to match the required pattern to get through, here you turn dials on the floor to change the flow of light until it reaches the required endpoint. I don't have much to say about them except that, despite what I said in the Zero Dawn video about disliking puzzles in games, I actually found these ones to be rather enjoyable, and I find it a bit of a shame that they aren't brought back in Forbidden West. Once we're through the door and complete a quick platforming section, we're back outside, considerably higher up than we were before. Clambering over some scaffolding, we reach another door that takes us back inside the mountain. Eventually we find Aurea in a large chamber working on some sort of mural at the far end, speaking to some unseen entity, begging that it speak to her, while Aloy cautiously approaches from the other side. When she turns and spots Aloy, she's immediately shocked and perhaps a little perturbed since the way was supposed to be blocked, done so by someone she calls the Spirit. Aloy points to the floor puzzle at the center of the chamber, referring to the one we used earlier, and offers to show Aurea how.
I could show you.
Yes, show me. Please.
Once we've solved the puzzle, we're immediately greeted by the aforementioned Spirit, though it's clear that it's far from what the Banuk believe it to be. It quickly calls for Aurea, asking for her help, but as quickly as it appears, it's overtaken by another entity, the Daemon. The Spirit attempts to fight back, but is overwhelmed by the Daemon, who quickly severs the transmission. Despite being rather brief, we learn some important details in this scene. That the Spirit and the Daemon are, in fact, very real, though clearly not in the mystical sense as the Banuk believe, that the Daemon has trapped the Spirit in its clutches somehow, and that the Spirit and Aurea seem to know each other. Aurea is floored by what she's just seen, quickly viewing Aloy as a revelation, as well as latching onto the idea that they could together free the Spirit from the Daemon's clutches. Aloy pumps the brakes a bit, given that, in her mind, despite having many questions, she still hasn't learned a damn thing, with Aurea more than willing to answer what she can. As just mentioned, Aurea has some sort of relationship with the Spirit, one that dates back to the Red Raids. Aurea was on the run from the Karja, who had scattered her Werak. Cut off and alone, she took refuge in the mountain when she couldn't get the raiders off her tail. Inside, she heard the Spirit, who helped her escape by locking the way in, the same door we unlocked earlier. With the Karja taken care of, the Spirit asked Aurea for help, saying that she was hurt and needed fixing. In the chamber were the necessary parts, the Spirit asking Aurea to bring them to Thunder's drum, where it resided. There, the Spirit showed Aurea how to repair it, thus beginning what Aurea calls their communion.
So began our communion.
She returned to the Spirit many times, the two keeping each other company, with Aurea eventually bearing her soul to it, while the Spirit, according to her, just listened, never once judging her. Aurea refers to the Spirit as a lost soul, stranded by the fading of the blue light, caused by the growing anger of the machines, which we know as the derangement. It's here that the daemon enters the equation. As Araya tells it, the spirit told her that it was under attack by this malevolent entity, that it needed its power to do what it willed. What that is unknown, only that the spirit was desperate to shed itself of the daemon's shackles, even if it meant being destroyed in the process. I say was because, according to Araya, the spirit told her that 5 years ago. In fact, the quick blip of the spirit we saw only moments earlier was the first time she had heard its voice in those 5 years. That's because, due to the ongoing war with the Karja, she was taken prisoner as she tried to reach Aratak, only returning to the Cut well after the liberation. Upon her return, she and Aratak gathered a Werak of Banuk hunters to march on Thunder's Drum and face the daemon. The result of this showdown was the very funeral we saw when we first arrived at Song's Edge. Unable to agree on what to do next, Araya returned to the very chamber we're in now in the hopes of hearing the spirit again, which she did, thanks to Aloy. Aloy resolves that the only way to truly figure out what's going on is to obviously go to Thunder's Drum, but Araya makes it clear that it's not possible, and not just because the daemon has turned it into a fortress. As chieftain, Aratak controls the pass to the mountain and has forbidden access to it. Aloy suggests offhandedly that they should just get a new chieftain, with Araya suggesting that there would be those who would agree. It's then that she gets an idea. Challenge Aratak. Aloy's automatically against the idea, but when Araya states rather plainly that it's the only way they'll be able to get to the mountain, she reluctantly accepts.
I can't believe I'm agreeing to this.
Araya stipulates that to earn the right to challenge Aratak, she must gain the Werak's attention, before listing off ways it can be done, as well as presenting Aloy with a new weapon. From here we can set off and make our name in the cut, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we can also ask Araya about silence. You can actually first ask Bergren about him when you first meet him, but all he's heard is rumors and whispers that treat Silence like some boogeyman, suggesting that he's a well-known entity among the Banuk. When we ask Araya, she states she's sworn to an oath of secrecy on the matter by the Conclave, a group of the most important Banuk shamans that meet in Banur from time to time, but does infer that Silence is indeed very powerful, even if he is shrouded in constant secrecy. Aloy is persistent, but Araya is steadfast in her silence, and thus the matter is dropped, at least for the time being. For now, we have some Banuk to impress. Exiting the mountain onto the platform overlooking the cut, we can begin to plot our next move, pondering all the while on what we and Aloy have gotten ourselves into. From Araya on the mountain, we have a few options on how to get the Werak's attention. Though this task may seem daunting at first, made more so by the litany of markers on screen as we exit the mountain, you don't have to do all of them to progress the quest, needing only to complete 2 of them. These are reactivating a tall neck frozen in ice, doing so by recovering some components scavenged by, scavengers, allowing us to override and reveal the surrounding land. Clearing out a bandit camp led by an Oseram pyromaniac named Olgrud, who stole a weapon from an Oseram tinker named Varja, who just so happens to be Bergren's daughter.
You're both, how do I put it?
Women?
No, independent.
Winning at the hunting grounds far to the north, which are run by Lalvik, an older Banuk woman who insists that it was they who started them, not the Karja.
So who was the first?
We were.
And the Karja stole it from you.
That's right.
And finally, gathering pigments for the painter Sakuli, a friend of Araya's who resides on the scaffolding overlooking Song's Edge, the end result being a massive mural featuring Aloy on the cliff face. Though they appear like busy work, and you could argue that one of them certainly is, I'd argue that this is mostly acceptable because it works at pushing you to explore the cut, discovering new places, people, and even quests. They also provide ample world building and storytelling in certain respects. The tall neck, for example, isn't just a set piece. It was knocked over in a storm, then encased in ice when it was unable to get up again. We also find numerous dead Banuk around its base, suggesting that they were defending it from the ravenous scavengers we come across, some of whom are under demonic possession. Once you completed 2 of these objectives, you return to Song's Edge, where Aloy lays her spirit at Aratak's feet, initiating her challenge.
For the Werak.
You? This must be a joke.
It is not a joke, Aratak.
It's here that Araya appears to back her claim, meaning that Aratak has no choice but to accept. Though only one woman, leadership of Werak is shared between chiefs and shamans, and so, being the latter, Araya's voice carries enough weight to force Aratak's hand. It's here we learn that Aratak and Araya's disagreement isn't so cut and dried, because they're siblings.
Brother and sister? This is a little more complicated than I thought.
No, it's simple. You will meet me at the Frost Figures, and I'll put a quick end to this mockery.
Aloy is none too pleased by this revelation and is quick to confront Araya on the matter. Araya reasons that she didn't think she'd have to, also adding that she didn't want Aloy to think their journey was merely an extension of their family squabble. She's also rather surprised that Aratak even brought it up, particularly in front of a stranger, usually being a man of few words.
I prefer deeds to words.
Aloy seems to accept this explanation, but does reprimand Araya for her secrecy, stating that if they're going to succeed, they need to be straight with each other. Aurea, recognizing that she underestimated Aloy, promises not to make the same mistake again, and sets off for the Frost figures. Frankly, I find the whole brother-sister angle to fall rather flat. My guess is that the writers were trying to recontextualize their relationship and subsequent quarrel in a more emotional and meaningful way, and yet it fails to do either. Anyone with siblings younger or older can tell you that such arguments are often, though not always, part and parcel of such relationships, and so what is supposed to be a huge moment in the story doesn't survive first contact beyond the follow-up conversation with Aurea. It's only later that it holds any real emotional weight, but by then the DLC story is pretty much over by that stage, and thus loses any potential meaning it might have had, despite the writers gently driving this plot point home at several points after its initial reveal. Heading for the Frost figures, we find Aratak and Aurea overlooking a small valley. It's here that we learn the full details of the challenge. Essentially, it's a race to see who can hunt machines the fastest, doing so over 3 stages split up by platforming sections, all while being observed by members of the Werak. At the end of each section are balloons that must be launched into the sky after completing them to mark their progress. The third stage is where both hunters compete directly with one another, with the first to launch the final balloon declared the winner, either taking or retaining the title of chief. Sounds simple enough, right? Except for one teensy-weensy detail. As challenger, Aloy's path will be considerably harder. Should any one of her balloons be launched after Aratak's, he wins and retains the title of chieftain. Before things get underway, Aratak calls Aloy off to the side to have a private word, to convince her to withdraw, stressing that she, quite simply, isn't Banuk, that she cannot begin to understand the responsibilities of being a chieftain, and that he won't risk Aurea's life again. Aloy refuses, of course, fully recognizing that there's no other way to gain access to the mountain otherwise, which draws Aratak's ire, quickly snuffed out by Aurea. Though this scene isn't all that important to the wider narrative, I have to highlight Aloy's comportment here. She was never shy about challenging those in positions of authority in the base game either, make no mistake about that, but not like she does here with Aratak, staring him down with a steely demeanor, calmly but coldly refusing to back down, displaying an attitude that I doubt even the hardiest Banuk would dare show him. You have to remember, Aratak is an immensely skilled hunter and hardened warrior, a veteran of the Red Race, a Werak chieftain whose name and legend carries an immense amount of weight and respect amongst his people, with an imposing physical presence to match, and yet here's Aloy, an outlander, straight up refusing to be cowed by it.
Then we better get on with this.
This could explain Aratak's anger at the end, taken aback by her response, unused to being challenged in such a way. There's also another possibility, one that I'll get into later when I speak about him and Aurea in more depth. Before we start the challenge, I want to highlight arguably the biggest improvement the DLC has over the base game. By now you may have already noticed the vastly improved animations, both in dialogue sequences and scripted cutscenes. While I think the scripted cutscenes in the base game get a bit of a bad rap, the criticisms surrounding the animations and dialogue sections, particularly in facial animations and lip syncing, are more than valid. The Frozen Wilds shows an astounding level of improvement in this area, both in its main story and side quests. Dialogue sequences are still a little bit static in their implementation, but are given so much more life with these new animations that you barely notice it. This night and day improvement in the animations is my mystery third reason as to why I recommend you finish the base game before starting the Frozen Wilds, because it can be quite jarring going from this, to this, then back to this. Dialogue delivery is also vastly improved. That's not to say the voice performances in the base game were bad, most were either very good or excellent, just that there's such a better flow to conversations in the DLC. My guess is that while most voice lines for each character were recorded separately for the base game, the DLC saw more group recording sessions, allowing the performers to better play off one another in their respective scenes. This subtle change, coupled with the improved animations and greater use of motion capture, gives the Frozen Wilds a wonderful cinematic quality that makes an already very good set of stories all the better. At Aurea's orders, Aloy and Aratak take their places and wait for the shaman to give the call to start.
Now!
Though earlier I said the shaman's path is closer to it in terms of narrative placement and setup, this challenge is far more similar to the Proving in terms of gameplay, though even here there are considerable differences. For one, this challenge is considerably longer, what with the multiple stages I mentioned only a short while ago. You may have also seen that there's a timer at the top of the screen, adding a further amount of tension to the race. This tension can be felt right from the first climbing section up to the first stage, as there's multiple ways forward and you may accidentally take the long way up. This can have a huge effect on how much time you'll have to complete the subsequent hunting section, with you either having just enough time to be clinical about it, or having to frantically kill the machines as quickly as possible. This process is then repeated for the second stage, though the clock mercifully resets upon starting it. Finishing the second stage, we work our way down into the valley just as the storm begins to kick up and limit visibility. If you're like me, you'll immediately see this as a bad omen and begin to think that shit's about to hit the fan. Taking a final slipwire, Aloy lands in the valley at the same time as Aratak, and just as the final balloon is blown away in the storm. As almost expected, and as pointed out by Aratak, something clearly isn't right. That something is not 1, not 2, but 3 demonic frost claws. So begins one of the more aggressively bullshit combat encounters in the DLC, just in case you had somehow forgotten how difficult this DLC is, especially when going up against these monstrosities. Yet this encounter isn't even the worst offender in this category. The biggest one's coming later, don't you worry.
Great, just what I need.
Keeping in line with all that, this fight is suitably chaotic, though you do have Aratak to give you a hand, dealing some decent damage while being a pretty good distraction, allowing you to get some shots in, or at least focus all your attention on one of the frost claws for a bit. After finishing off the not-so-caring Care Bears, Aloy and Aratak finally have a chance to catch their breath just as the storm ever so conveniently begins to clear. Array and some of the other Banuk soon arrive, with one of them, named Ruatuk, declaring the competition void since it never truly finished, much to Aloy's visible frustration. Speaking of Ruatuk, we see her and another Banuk named Signutai speaking to Aratak on a couple of occasions, first after the funeral in Song's Edge, then again later on still looking to him for orders despite Aloy now being chieftain, and quickly leaving when she comes to speak to him. This suggests that they're utterly loyal to Aratak and are either subconsciously still seeing him as their chieftain or simply refusing to recognize Aloy. I bring this up because Ruatuk is real quick to bring up the fact that the competition was cut short and that there can be no result, perhaps in the hopes of all but guaranteeing Aratak remain as Werak chieftain. Aratak, though, has other ideas.
You saw what she did. She defeated the machines. Not I. It is proven. She is the better hunter. We are Banuk. Survive, prevail. What else matters? My blood is in your teeth. I take my place behind you on the hunt.
Araya swiftly declares the way to Thunder's drum close to all but Aloy and herself, followed by Aratak asking to go with them. We get a brief moment where Araya appears to try and supersede Aloy, who quickly puts her foot down and asserts her authority, granting Aratak's request in the process.
Only if you do as I say.
I find Araya's mannerism interesting here. Ever since we've met her in her retreat, she's harped on about both of them going to Thunder's drum presumably as equals, or at least with Aloy having some nominal leadership after displaying her capabilities. Yet as soon as the way to the mountain is clear, she tries to assert some authority over the matter. This could very easily be her looking to keep her brother in check, but I'm not so sure. Earlier, in an optional side conversation, Araya bemoans how, by keeping her from the mountain, Aratak was keeping her from her destiny. By now it's no secret, both in the DLC and in the base game, that Banuk shamans don't always see things through the fabric of reality. But this line, followed by this moment after the challenge, suggests that Araya may see this more as a personal quest than a truly collaborative effort. I don't think this is intentional on Araya's part. She mentions in that same earlier conversation that she prefers the company of spirits and herself, not other people, and as a result has a constant set of blinders on. This single-mindedness of hers could have been an interesting spin on the story had it been explored in more depth, but unfortunately isn't. With that said and done, Araya and the other Banuk set off, with her telling Aloy to meet them at a camp at the base of the mountain, a place called Long Notch, when she's ready, setting the stage for freeing the spirit, as well as for the final confrontation with the daemon.
Chieftain.
From the Frostclaw Fracas we can head straight to Long Notch and Thunder's Drum beyond, but I consider the time between to be the best opportunity to complete the DLC's side quests, of which there are quite a few.
Nope! Not old Gildan.
I won't get into the nuts and bolts of them. In short, they carry over many of the base game's best qualities, while, like everything else in the DLC, benefiting greatly from the vast improvements on the technical side. Improved animations, dialogue delivery, greater use of motion capture, etc.
What a strange thing it is to be old. To stare backward and see such distance, but to stare forward at a looming wall.
Given the sharper focus of the DLC, all of them revolve around the Banuk, directly or indirectly. It's through these quests that we learn quite a bit about Banuk culture, as well as its glaring flaws, which call into question the efficacy of the Banuk mindset in this fast-changing, increasingly hostile world. For this section, we'll be looking at one side quest in particular that begs to question the most important pillars of Banuk culture and whether they can be sustained.
An outlander, huh?
Towards the north of the cut is a camp known as Keener's Rock, where a Werak known as the White Teeth have taken up temporary residence. A renowned group of warriors well known among the Banuk, they have come south from Banur to test any hunters that wish to join them, or run with them as they put it. Earlier I mentioned that the word Werak is the Banuk term for clan, but that in truth is an inaccuracy, one that I've intentionally withheld up until now. Clans traditionally are formed based on blood and familial ties, but not Weraks. No one is born into one, and a hunter must instead join one by way of a test, the manner of which is set by the presiding chieftain. With this in mind, Weraks are in a roundabout way more akin to sports teams of our modern world. Hunters can leave a Werak of their own volition, or in the case of criminal acts, be exiled from the Werak. Weraks are also in practice meritocracies, and a hunter's rank is determined based on having the proficiency of a particular skill, especially something that the Werak can make active use of, as well as whether or not they have earned the respect of the Werak itself. For the White Teeth, their test is a trial by ordeal, to survive 4 days and 4 nights on a glacier in a region called the Knife Trail, surviving on only what they can scrounge up from the landed machines, and even the latter can only be harvested for weapons.
Metal to fashion weapons. The rest is forbidden.
Each hunter is also expected to survive on their own, to refuse help from others or offer help to others, with only 2 possible outcomes at the end: survival or death. When Aloy meets the White Teeth, 2 hunters still haven't returned. However, the Werak has no intention of going out to search for them, reasoning that it's all part of the trial. If they're worthy to run with the White Teeth, they'll return. If not, the Werak will simply mark their attempt and move on, trusting that the glacier's runoff will carry the bodies out. Eventually. Aloy is rather disgusted by this and resolves to go and find them herself, despite the chieftain stating that they won't accept her aid because survival is sacred. Nonetheless, Aloy heads for the glacier.
Survival is sacred. So they leave people to die?
Peace and harmony.
Already we can begin to see a glaring issue in Banuk culture, and it derives from those 3 words. Survival is sacred. Of course, this mentality, when viewed through the lens of Banuk history, as well as the lands they traditionally inhabit, isn't without cause. That part isn't hard to see. The problem is that it's morphed into this quasi-religious mindset that has come to trump even the most basic courtesies, such as helping or accepting help from others in times of need, or even just looking for fellow hunters that have gone missing. While this quest merely focuses on this aspect as it pertains to the White Teeth, it's a single-minded disposition that is manifested across most of the tribe. As the Banuk see it, a hunter who cannot survive on their own, who can't fend for themselves, is a burden, one that must be cast off. Another layer to this, one that feeds off the survivalist aspect and will rear its ugly frozen head a little later in this quest, is the Banuk obsession with prevailing over any and all challenges, and never backing down from one, seeing it as shameful to do so even when death is practically certain. This has almost bred a sense of fatalism among most Banuk, who see death as merely a byproduct of this lifestyle, an honorable end for any hunter who stayed true to the ways of the tribe. Now this aspect isn't exactly unique to the Banuk in this world, but in their case it feels rather excessive. All of that puts the Banuk in a bit more precarious position than other tribes when the derangement is brought into the equation. The results of Aratak's failed assault against the Daemon already shows that this near fatalistic attitude towards challenges and survival could very well be the tribe's downfall if it doesn't go through a drastic overhaul of its entire culture. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this is a simple fix, that you can just change an entire tribe overnight. I mean, look at the Nora in the base game. It took them suffering a string of tragedies, including being on the brink of annihilation, followed soon after by Aloy's impassioned chastisement to finally bring about a complete and total cultural shift. For the Banuk, it would be far more difficult and complicated given their incredibly stubborn nature, and because they have no central governing authority to guide them, the tribe only being held together by shared laws and customs. Judging by most Banuk we've met, change doesn't look to be coming anytime soon, despite the many glaring signs that their way of life isn't sustainable in the face of the growing machine threat. Reaching the base of the glacier, we find one of the missing hunters, a young woman named Akri. After helping her take out a herd of lance horns and their accompanying watchers, we immediately find that she's not like other Banuk.
Who else would join me on this path I've taken? Which path would that be? Away from tradition. Away from the Werak. It's not so.
Before she can go into greater detail, she and Aloy become surrounded by a pack of demonic scrappers, drawn in by the many machine carcasses. Midway through the subsequent fight, a flock of Glinthawks also arrive, but eventually Aloy and Akri take care of them all. Now we have a chance to speak with Akri. By all accounts, she's more than capable of returning to the White Teeth, having completed their trial, yet she remains because the second hunter, Mylen, broke her leg while descending the glacier. She and Akri have been friends all their lives, but now their friendship has been severely tested, Mylen refusing any and all help as per the rules of the test. Akri offered food and medicine, but Mylen refused all of it, keeping Akri at a distance. Now, with the Werak about to leave, it's become paramount to Akri that Mylen get back to them, for joining the White Teeth is everything to her. For Akri, we'll get to that. Following Kree up the glacier, we find Mylen in a small ice cave, unconscious and surrounded by a trio of Longlegs. Engaging the mechanized Big Birds, we're soon attacked by more demonic Scrappers, followed by a demonic Scorcher to round off this combat section. With the machines out of the way, Aloy and Kree can finally check on Mylen. Aloy immediately begins to put on the splint a Kree made for Mylen's leg, stopping midway through and checking her temperature. It's here that Mylen awakens and immediately begins to chastise a Kree. It's here that Aloy gives Mylen an ultimatum.
5.
Which would you rather keep, Mylen? Your leg or your pride? Because I think you're gonna have to choose.
Swallowing her pride, even if for just a moment, Mylen allows Aloy to finish with the splint. She gets up and begins to shamble away, refusing any help in doing so. A Kree calls after her, hoping that she can forgive her one day, which leads to the following scene.
I never accepted your help. It's the Werak you should ask for forgiveness. I didn't care about the Werak.
And so the truth of it all is laid bare. A Kree didn't share Mylen's dream of joining the White Teeth, but still went ahead and risked her life in their trial to ensure that Mylen, her best and only friend, would. And with Aloy's help she succeeded, but clearly at a personal cost. So determined to join the White Teeth, and perhaps valuing tradition over their lifelong friendship, Mylen refused all of her help, seeing their friendship as a burden, an affront to the values of the Werak she so longed to be a part of, unaware that a Kree didn't share this same goal. It was only at the end, at a Kree's words, "I didn't care about the Werak," did she finally come to this realization. Yet even as she's suddenly drenched with guilt, there's nothing more that she can do except carry on down the glacier. Their friendship, whatever was left of it by then, had been irrevocably severed. Aloy attempts to console a Kree, but she won't be moved, her whole world shattering before her eyes. She resolves to go her own way, away from the Werak, those who led Mylen to die, and perhaps even away from the tribe entirely. When Aloy asks what to tell the Werak, she says to tell them that she fell, and that Mylen endured. With that, Aloy leaves a Kree on the glacier. Returning to Keener's Rock, we go and speak with the White Teeth chieftain. Mylen has returned as well, and the chieftain asks if Aloy has anything to say about it, his tone rather off-putting, making him more unlikable than he already was. Aloy and Mylen look at one another for a moment, Mylen undoubtedly concerned that Aloy might tell the chieftain that she had a hand in her coming back, which would disqualify her from joining the Werak. You get a choice in how you respond, but the overall gist of all of them is the same. By the rules of the ordeal and the laws of the Banuk, she endured 4 days and 4 nights on the glacier, just as was asked of her. As such, Mylen is accepted into the White Teeth. On the subject of a Kree, Aloy complies with her wish and informs them that she fell, with even Mylen recognizing what she means going along with the lie. So ends the quest, but we have a chance to speak with Mylen before we leave, and it's here that I have to wonder if she truly learned anything. Despite fully understanding what a Kree said back on the glacier she hobbled away, she continues to justify her actions, stating that the law of survival wouldn't allow a Kree and Aloy to risk their lives to save her, all because of mistakes she made, hence her demeanor towards a Kree. This harkens back to a point I made earlier about the Banuk, that among other factors their stubbornness could be a major obstacle against making any meaningful cultural change. It is possible that she's trying to justify it all more to herself than Aloy here, but given what we've just learned and discussed, I can't be sure. Look, I like the Banuk as a tribe, and I hope they return to the series at some point, but if there's anything I've learned from this quest, and the DLC as a whole, is that they're the least prepared for what's coming down the road. There's no denying their bravery and skill, but their quasi-religious overvaluation of the law of survival, and prevailing over all challenges, coupled with their lack of unity beyond a shared culture and set of laws, is more than a little concerning to me. Throughout the series, we see other tribes take steps to adapt to this ever-changing world, willingly or by Aloy's forced intervention, and yet the Banuk seem to almost take pride in going against this grain, even if it's to their own detriment. Here's hoping that change happens before it's too late. It's now time to ascend Thunder's Drum, to free the spirit and face the daemon. Arriving at Long Notch, we can find Aratak speaking to the two Banuk I mentioned earlier, while Araya is further up at the entrance into the mountain, waiting for Aloy to give the go-ahead. Here we have a chance to stock up before making the trek, as well as speak to both Aratak and Araya, to learn more about their complicated relationship. As mentioned earlier, both were heavily involved in the Red Raids, with Aratak defending the cut against Carja raiders, while Araya was captured and taken to Meridian in chains, but not to be sacrificed or made into simple slave labor. One of a shaman's responsibilities in a Werak is to track and stun machines. With this knowledge in mind, the Carja made a point of capturing Banuk shamans, so they could use them to capture machines that would later be unleashed in their sun rings as part of their blood sacrifices. As Aratak sees it, due to the horror she undoubtedly witnessed and the shame she suffered as a result of her forced participation in it, not all of Aurea came back, that she was changed by the experience. For this reason, he's fiercely protective of her, so adamant about not letting her return to Thunder's Drum after the first expedition failed. This protectiveness is the other possible reason I mentioned earlier that could explain why he gets so furious with Aloy when she refuses to withdraw her challenge, because her possible victory would mean that Aurea would be able to return to Thunder's Drum, away from his protection. A justified concern because, well, here we are, about to do exactly that. Aurea doesn't agree with his assessment, claiming the cards didn't change her but sharpened her focus, to hone in on what's important, that being the spirit most of all, though she does admit to thinking about Aratak, worrying for him while she was in captivity. Much in the same way he sees her, Aurea sees Aratak greatly changed by the raids, the carnage and stress of war leaving him emotionally hardened, more so than usual. Despite enduring numerous wounds, he instead complains that life with her is harder, and to her credit she concedes to this point, recognizing that she hasn't exactly made it easy for him. I think this is also a way to suggest that she knows Aratak only wants to protect her, just that both of them have failed to help one another understand, clearly and concisely, their motivations, partly because Aurea, by her own admission earlier, isn't good at judging people, and reckoned that Aratak wouldn't entirely get it, thus didn't explain her motivations beyond, I need to go to the mountain and help the spirit. It's here that I want to talk about another aspect of the Frozen Wilds that's done incredibly well, and how it relates to these two, and that's the topic of characters. Piggybacking off the points I made earlier about the improved animations and cutscenes and dialogue sections, as well as dialogue delivery, I want to acknowledge the brilliance of the characters in the DLC, both in their presentation and their writing, something that even Aloy benefits from greatly.
Tell me, Bergrand, are you worried about their well-being or your purse strings?
A man can worry about two things.
Forbidden West has received heaps and heaps of well-deserved praise in all those areas, and the Frozen Wilds is where they were practiced and mostly perfected, making the DLC, with a generous application of hindsight, a preview for what was to come in the sequel. I love most of the characters in the base game, don't get me wrong, but due to their vastly improved presentation, I find myself more connected with the DLC side characters, and find the dialogue they provide more interesting and engaging. My hope is that a few of them make a return to the series at some point, more specifically Kree, who we've already met, and a hilarious Oseram Delver named Gildan, who we meet in another side quest. Hell, I'll even throw the Shaman Enjuk in there as well. Admittedly, this is entirely personal since his return would make zero narrative sense, but I can't help but love the guy. All you have to do for him is find animal figurines scattered throughout the cut and return them to their assigned pedestals in a room museum he set up as some sort of shrine. Yet I find his infectious and humble love for naturalism, as well as his uninformed yet often hilarious hypotheses about these animals, to be so goddamn endearing and wholesome I just want to wrap him up and protect him from any and all danger. On God, if anything ever happens to him, there'll be hell to pay. All of this to say, the characters in the Frozen Wilds are excellent, thanks to the improvements we've already gone over, making them more engaging and interesting as a result. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for these two.
This must be a joke!
It is not a joke, Aratak!
Despite being the DLC's main supporting cast, Aratak and Aurea are just not that compelling of characters. Granted, this is entirely subjective, but I find their entire arc to fall rather flat, which is unfortunate since we spend so much time with them. I have to be fair and state that their performances are just as good as the rest in the DLC, and they get enough depth to not ruin the narrative, just not enough to make me really give a shit. This could simply be down to the story's short runtime, and in this aspect I can't fault the writers, as they would have had to have been very particular about what details to include and what to omit. Conversely though, there are many other side characters with far less screen time that come off as far more interesting and engaging, so much so that I would have preferred to hang out with them over these two. I'd argue this is largely down to the brother-sister plot point failing to be compelling when it was first revealed, for reasons I already went over earlier in Chapter 2, and because it forms the basis for all of their interactions for the rest of the story without getting more interesting. We get inklings of something better when we speak to them in and around Long Notch, but it never reaches the levels that might have salvaged their place in the story. Again, this could just be due to the shorter runtime the writers had to work with. With that in mind, this might have been fixed, and I must stress might have, by there being at least one more quest before we head to Thunder's Drum, where there could have been a deeper exploration of their relationship, perhaps harkening back to a time from before the Red Raids, from before the derangement even. Unfortunately, what we have is all we got. Just to be clear, I really like the Frozen Wilds story, particularly with how it builds on lore already established in the base game, then further adding to an already very solid foundation with new lore. However, this is all in spite of its two most important, yet most uninteresting side characters. I can only imagine how much better it would have been if the opposite of that last point was true. Guess we'll never know. Now before we move on, we need to talk about Silence again. It's in this conversation with Aurea that we can ask her again about him, using Aloy's new authority as chieftain to hopefully get some answers. Aurea is hesitant but eventually relents, recognizing that Aloy's past dealings with him justifies her need to know. According to Aurea, Silence came to Balnor from the far north as a young shaman, or at least claiming to be one, from a remote Werak known as the Owl's Watch, who vouched for him when asked to confirm. Exceptionally intelligent and knowledgeable about the machines, and with a desire to share his knowledge, he was quick to gain the trust of the Conclave, who meet once a year at a place called the Maelstrom, their most sacred meeting place. He eventually gained an invitation to attend, granting him the knowledge of the Maelstrom. This would unfortunately prove to be a grave error, for when they gathered again the following year, they found the Maelstrom had been looted of all its priceless old world relics, Silence having cut through ice and metal to steal them, before vanishing into thin air. The Conclave resolved to send hunters after him, but none ever returned. They also checked back with the Owl's Watch, but all who had vouched for him were gone. Some even began to doubt he was Banuk at all. In the end, every member of the Conclave took a vow to never speak of it, with Aurea's recounting being the first time since then. If you finished the base game prior to starting the DLC, then none of this is overly surprising, only furthering the fact that he's one massive douche canoe, particularly when set alongside his involvement with Hades in the Eclipse. If you haven't, then this will come as the moment you learn the lengths Silence will go to acquire knowledge. Aurea ends the conversation warning Aloy to never lower her guard around him, even if she can match, or perhaps better him.
Guard.
I'll keep that in mind, Aurea. Thanks.
We've come to the moment of truth, time to ascend the mountain. But how? As you can see, both on the way to Aurea and in the cinematic, the way is blocked by a massive wall of ice, with no real way up or around it. Aratok soon reveals the solution, shattering a section of the wall, uncovering an old world vent. Aurea and Naltuk then blow smoke from the nearby braziers into the vent, which causes this to happen. In case you haven't already guessed, the giant wall of ice is in fact the exterior of a massive old world facility frozen over, and by blowing smoke into the vent, they activated the emergency exit function, opening the way into the mountain, a neat and clever detail that I think is often overlooked.
So you see, I too can call upon the power of the Old Ones.
Entering the facility, we can already see that it is nothing like the old world ruins in the base game. This is the heart of the Firebreak project, though we don't know that yet, Aurea instead saying that the spirit referred to it as a fortress to defend mankind against an unknown threat. We also find our first audio data point, left by Kenny Chow, returning to the facility in 2064 for the first time in years. He's come back at Anita's request, who wants to find a way to suspend operations for some time. Though she isn't forthcoming on why, by the sound of her voice, Kenny deduces that it's something terrifying. That something is of course the Feral Plague. Given that it was still in its early stages, this wasn't exactly public knowledge at that time, so this does raise questions as to how Anita would know about it. There is an answer to this, but it isn't given until much later, and never with 100% certainty. Climbing over a wall, we come across our first demonic machines, dispelling any fleeting hopes that we might have had a nice easy jaunt through the facility. Taking care of those, we exit into a large open area, dominated by what appears to be enormous generator heat coil looking things. Scorchers and a behemoth patrol this area, Aratok pointing out the Banuk corpses they had to leave behind the last time. Aurea then points out a second path, up a flight of stairs and around. There are also machines there, but also plenty of cover and tall grass, giving us a stealthy option. Full disclosure, I've never taken Aratok's path, so I can't say what the differences are between the two. Aurea's path is pretty simple, though it requires a lot of patience to do stealthily, and can quickly devolve into a chaotic fracas with scrappers, watchers, stalkers, and a long leg should you be caught. Regardless, once you're through this area, you're given a reprieve from the machines. We also find another data point from Kenny Chow, where he mentions that he can reduce the power draw so that Firebreak's cooling system could be masked by the caldera. Wait, what? Caldera? You're telling me this facility is building around a volcano? What the fuck?
Boys, shut up! Ugh!
Okay, chances are I didn't fool you with my horribly fake shock and surprise. That said, I think it's high time we talk about what Project Firebreak really is, because it's around this time that the pieces begin to fall into place, though the full truth won't be revealed until towards the very end. Like almost all locations in the Horizon series, the region of the cut is set in a real-life place. In this case, it's Yellowstone National Park in the state of Wyoming. In the park is the Yellowstone Caldera, a massive supervolcano that, in our present timeline, last erupted around 640,000 years ago. In fact, apart from occasional stirrings, it hasn't risen from its slumber in roughly 70,000 years. Though scientists aren't convinced that there will be another catastrophic eruption akin to the ones in the distant past, there is still the probability that it can happen, though it's approximated to be only 1 in 730,000. In Horizon's timeline, however, the caldera threatened to become unstable and wipe out much of the world in the 2040s, possibly due to massive environmental upheaval in the 2030s, and needed to be subdued at all costs. This is where Project Firebreak enters the equation, funded personally by Ted Faro, using technology that, according to the Horizon Wiki, was innovated by Elizabeth Sobek. All this led to the construction of the sprawling underground facility inside the mountain that the Banuk know as Thunder's Drum. The purpose of the project was to basically keep the caldera stable and stop it from exploding and causing a mass extinction event that could span the globe. How is never revealed, though given the massive heat coil looking things we saw earlier, which are in fact, according to the Horizon Wiki, geothermal energy taps, it can be hypothesized that the system merely draws vast quantities of heat off the caldera, not allowing it to build up and pressurize. So how is this place still running almost 1,000 years later? The answer to that lies in the following conference room, overlooking a large open area with a cauldron door on the far side. We watch a hologram where Kenny and Anita, with their unseen colleagues, celebrate Firebreak's successful launch. We're then introduced to Cyan, who Aurea immediately recognizes as the spirit. Though she isn't entirely sure, Aloy is quick to realize what Cyan might be. An AI, though to what degree is unclear as of yet. After heading down into the open area and taking care of the demonic machines present, we inspect the cauldron door. If you remember from Zero Dawn, cauldrons were built by Gaia to construct the machines. With that in mind, you're probably thinking that finding a cauldron inside a mountain isn't all that unusual. Except this cauldron door wasn't there before, at least not while Aurea was there, prior to her capture. The door was only discovered after the first expedition got as far as it, making it a very new construct. Nonetheless, we approach the door, stepping past the corpse of the Banuk that the first expedition had to leave behind, and proceed to open it like any other door. Except, just as we're in the process of doing so, the daemon locks us out and unleashes a possessed Thunderjaw. Oh joy. Taking care of the Thunderjaw, whose disc launchers you can't use once they're shot off for some goddamn reason, we try the door again, this time unhindered. Opening the door reveals yet more of the facility, and a horrifying sight. Much of the facility has been overrun by strange purple glowing cables and wires, products of the daemon's corruption. Aurea is visibly distraught by this and laments that the original path to the spirit, Cyan, is lost to them. Aloy resolves to find a new path and leads the trio onward. Much of the original facility has been turned into a cauldron, designated Epsilon, with only trace amounts of the original construct left, usually in the form of pathways connecting sections together. Like cauldrons in the base game, Aloy has to navigate Epsilon by solving environmental puzzles, forming bridges, shutting off vents, and taking down machines that get in your way. The biggest difference, of course, is that you have Aratak and Aurea with you, with much of the platforming sections revolving around finding a way to get them across certain gaps. They also help in combat, and while not the best, it's certainly welcome. Along the way, we come across a couple of the sections of the facility I just mentioned, those mostly untouched by the daemon. In these sections, we come across holographic messages left by Cyan, which Aloy can access using the Master Override. Though both are important, the first one offers probably the biggest revelation of the entire DLC, that the daemon is in fact Hephaestus, Gaia's subfunction responsible for aiding the construction of the cauldrons, as well as designing and building the machines meant to aid terraforming operations. So how the hell did it end up taking over Firebreak and capturing Cyan? If we remember from Zero Dawn, all of Gaia's subfunctions became chaotic, self-aware AIs when the mysterious signal woke them, then got free when Hades dissolved their code shackles. Where Hephaestus went after this isn't revealed here, but it eventually took control of Cyan and the facility with it, reconfiguring it to build hostile machines. The message is then cut off when the daemon, Hephaestus, recaptures it. The second message suggests that, due to instabilities caused by Hephaestus' reconfiguration, that there may be a way to destroy compromised elements of the facility while preserving most of the backup stabilization, because even in these dire straits, the last thing anyone wants is an ancient supervolcano exploding all of a sudden. Truth be told, it might have actually made Hades' plan of a second Pharaoh plague a bit easier, but I digress.
I'd say get to the point.
No nonsense. I like it.
Interspersed with Cyan's messages are more data points from Kenny Chow, where he postulates how he's going to mask Cyan and by extension Firebreak, then realizing through the news that the Pharaoh Plague is what Anita is trying to hide it from, though with added dread that, if such an action is necessary, that no one is going to survive, except for Cyan. There's one last data point from Kenny before we reach the facility's control center, his final chat with Anita, followed by his lamenting of missed opportunities and deepest regrets, revolving around his relationship with her. Despite what I said earlier about this whole old world romantic subplot falling flat, I'll admit that I'm touched by this data point every time I find it, largely due to just how well it's written, even if I forget about it mere moments later. There's also one more interesting tidbit that can easily be missed here, and that's Anita asking for some of Cyan's confidential log pertaining to emotional responses, which had been kept secret because Cyan was designed to have emotions and empathy, which had been outlawed at the time of its creation. Why did she need that log, you may ask? Because she was working on another AI, one that just might save the world from the Pharaoh Plague. I'll let you think about that one for a bit. Following this data point, the control center comes into view, overrun by Hephaestus' infestation, while the malevolent AI spouts orders in a very creepy computerized voice.
Voice of the taken.
In the control center, we find Cyan, completely wrapped up by Hephaestus' cables, while beyond is the cauldron's core, protected by some sort of shield. Approaching Cyan, we activate the DLC's final floor puzzle, a fairly complicated one and by far the best of them all. Once the puzzle is solved, Cyan is briefly released from her imprisonment, allowing Araya to speak to it for the first time in years. It informs the trio that Hephaestus is building thousands of hunter-killers, such as the Frostclaw, and that several of them have already been released. To stop this, much of the facility must be destroyed, with Cyan directing them to the core, just as Hephaestus recaptures it. Knowing Hephaestus will throw everything it has into defending the core, Aratak asks Araya to go and save herself, though he already knows that this isn't going to happen.
I would ask you to let Aloy and I do what must be done. And save yourself. But I already know the answer.
Approaching the core, we find that the shield is being powered by one of Hephaestus' towers. Overriding the tower sends out a shockwave that eliminates the shield around the core, as well as the cables holding it. This prompts the core to retreat into the floor, and we're greeted by this asshole. A Fireclaw, the Frostclaw's bigger and badder cousin. So begins the final boss battle of the DLC. I hate this fight, and I dread it every time I get here, but not because it's poorly rigged or bugged or anything of that nature, but because Fireclaws are so goddamn aggressive that half the fight is simply trying to create separation to get any meaningful shots in, making it infinitely worse than the fight with those 3 Frostclaws we talked about earlier. Much of the Fireclaw's abilities and movesets are exactly similar to its ice-throwing brethren, just instead it uses fire, and dishes out considerably more damage. Adding to this, Hephaestus will call in more machines throughout the fight, throwing more gasoline on an already raging bonfire bullshittery. But wait, there's more. When you knock the Fireclaw's health down to half, then again at a quarter, Hephaestus conjures up a tower to repair it, and thus you have to try and destroy them before they can repair the Fireclaw, all while Pyromaniac Winnie the Pooh lights your ass on fire.
Oh, bother.
Granted, my complaints here are highly subjective, because while I hate it, I can acknowledge that others will feel differently, especially when compared to the final fights with Helis and Hades. Also, the dopamine hit you get when you finally wall up the Fireclaw is pretty unreal. Once the Fireclaw is rightfully sent to hell, I'm sorry, I honestly hate them so much, the Cauldron core pops up from the floor and Aloy proceeds to override it, just like she has in every other Cauldron prior. Hephaestus, however, has one last trick up its sleeve, sending out a shockwave that immobilizes Aloy. It's then that Araya makes a fateful decision.
Araya! Don't!
Spirit! Cyan, please help me!
Restraints destroyed. Core access attained. I am initiating a chain reaction that will destroy the compromised elements of this facility. In order to maintain Caldera stabilization, I must now transfer my command functions to the auxiliary data center. Araya, I'm free. You must escape.
My sister!
Cyan is finally free, but at the terrible cost of Araya's life. Aratak is, of course, distraught by this, his worst fear coming to pass. Unfortunately, he has little time to grieve as Cyan's chain reaction begins to destroy the facility, forcing him and Aloy to make a hasty exit, though it does take some persuasion from Aloy to get him to leave Araya behind.
Artak. Survive. Prevail. You are Banuk. What else matters? Artak. She wouldn't have wanted you to die here. Let's go.
What follows is a lengthy but pretty epic cutscene, Aloy and Aratak making their escape on one of the Cauldron's carriers. Aloy almost falls off, but is saved by Aratak, who then helps her get back on the carrier before conjuring a bomb out of nowhere at Aloy's request. With the bomb, Aloy damages some robot armed thing, which then redirects the carrier through a crag in the mountainside.
Great Werak.
The carrier then somehow forgets how to fly, sending Aloy and Aratak flying down the mountainside, chased by an avalanche that kind of appears out of nowhere. The avalanche eventually gulfs the whole screen and we get a short cut to black. When we return, we find them at the base of the mountain, alive but unconscious, somehow not buried by the avalanche, but we'll just ignore that. When they come to, they're slow to get up, no doubt exhausted and aching from their tumble. Aratak then asks what happened to Cyan, to which Aloy remembers it mentioning that it transferred itself to an auxiliary center, which he postulates is Arraya's retreat at the end of the Shaman's Path. They agree to meet there, Aratak going on ahead and no doubt needing some time to be alone. Returning to Arraya's retreat, we find Aratak in conversation with Cyan, walking in just as Cyan replays its last recorded conversation with Arraya, just before she was captured 5 years earlier.
I will speak of this to my brother. Aratak is strong. At the Battle of the Frozen Ghosts, he took 3 Karja arrows and still came back to camp carrying a wounded scout. Never was I so happy to see him. Or so proud. So you see, if anything can be done to defend you, he will give it all he has.
Aloy's here. That's enough for now.
We can resume any time you like, Aratak, if you want to hear her voice again. Come closer, Aloy. We have much to discuss.
With Aratak outside, we have a chance to speak at length with Cyan about a varied range of topics. Depending where you're at in the main story, most of these conversation options might not be available, but once you learn about them, you can come back to Cyan and ask about them, given that at this stage it's a literal window into the old world, albeit a limited one. The most important ones as it pertains to the story are found on the main dialogue wheel, with the second wheel being those aforementioned discoverable topics. We learn that Cyan is indeed a fully fledged AI, though not to the same degree as Gaia. Whereas Gaia was designed to have a full range of emotions, Cyan's are limited, though it doesn't appear to be that way. After it awoke from its slumber, it was alone for centuries and struggled to cope, until Arraya came along and repaired her, just as Arraya described when we first met her. In that time of solitude, she optimized Firebreak, spreading the load across backup systems, which means that, despite the destruction of the main facility, it will continue to work as planned, with Cyan predicting the caldera will remain stable for at least another 3,300 years.
So we've got a little time.
Yes.
We then come to the topic of Hephaestus and ask if it was destroyed with the cauldron. The answer, unfortunately, is a blunt no, for one simple reason. It was never there to begin with. It had infiltrated and captured Cyan from a remote location, one that couldn't be traced. It did so through a discrete direct network connection request, which Cyan eagerly accepted, having been in isolation for so long. Instead, it was flooded with malicious code, with one, a malware daemon, managing to bypass its defenses and slave it to Hephaestus' network. Overriding its core programming, it forced Cyan to follow its instructions, even though they violated her most important directives. If you've completed the main story, Aloy can explain to Cyan where Hephaestus came from, that of Zero Dawn, what its original purpose was, and how it got free. We can then ask the question as to why it keeps building killer machines, and Cyan hypothesizes that due to continued hunting of machines by human tribes, it's building dangerous machines to protect the machines that are, in theory, keeping humans alive through their work on the terraforming system. Now you're probably thinking this doesn't make much sense, since the terraforming system isn't properly working since Gaia's destruction. That's true, but you have to remember, her subfunctions, including Hephaestus, are self-aware, but as we'll learn in Forbidden West, they're not, in human terms, mentally stable. As Hephaestus sees it, in its crazed state, it's only doing what it's programmed to do. It's now time for us to go, but before we do, Cyan has one more matter to discuss, that of Aratak and the rest of the Banuk. Cyan predicts he'll bring some of his people with him to show them Cyan. It has no desire to contradict the Banuk's worldview and spiritual beliefs, leaving much out from her conversations with Aurea. Aloy immediately recognizes this as Cyan asking if it should lie to the Banuk, which in turn brings us to a flashpoint. Here we can decide whether Cyan should be straight up, be gentle about it, or just trust its own judgment. I picked the last option, with Aloy summing it up best.
I trust your judgment, Cyan. You were cautious with Aurea. You had to be. You didn't know what had happened to the world. So, keep doing what you think is best. As long as you ditch the superstition eventually.
As the Banuk believe I am a supernatural entity, I cannot predict how they will react.
Just answer what they do ask the best you can. The truth will come out.
I see. I will follow your advice.
Leaving Cyan behind, we head back outside to check on Aratak. They share a moment together, overlooking the cut, where Aratak openly admits that, regardless of Aloy's intervention or not, he wouldn't have been able to protect Aurea, suggesting that he let her down. Choosing the hard option, Aloy counters this, saying that he helped her find her purpose. With this in mind, Aratak expresses pride in her, despite the end result.
I'm proud of her.
There remains one more matter, that of the chieftaincy. Aloy of course can't stay, nor can the Werak follow. As such, she relinquishes the title back to Aratak in a very Aloy fashion. No fluff, no ceremony, just here, it's yours. Aratak graciously accepts, seeing himself as becoming wiser through their shared experience. He then sets off back down the mountain, leaving Aloy to reflect on all that has happened. It's then that Silence makes an unexpected call. It's nothing really special at first, just a quick rehash of everything that we've learned throughout the DLC, with both concluding that Hephaestus, like Hades, has to be stopped. It gets rather interesting, however, and only if you pressed Aurea about it before going into the mountain, when Aloy brings up Silence's past dealings with the Conclave.
You could stop right there.
Having made a point of keeping his past a secret, Silence is quite disturbed that a part of it was brought to light, and is quick to warn Aloy not to push the matter further. Aloy doesn't, knowing that she isn't going to get more out of him, and thus their conversation is abruptly ended, which in turn brings the story of the Frozen Wilds to an end.
I think it was over before it began. Catch up with you down the trail.
All told, the story of the Frozen Wilds is a wonderful addition to an already excellent game, and I strongly recommend it to anyone who might be on the fence about it. It perfectly builds on already established themes and lore, while presenting it in a manner vastly improved from the base game, while on top of that, giving us even more to chew on. Despite my criticisms, I think it's flown a little bit under the radar as an example of what a DLC of this scale should be, particularly narrative-wise. It's no Witcher 3's Blood and Wine or Hearts of Stone, but it's definitely worthy of standing alongside them in the conversation of best DLC expansions in the last decade. With its improved presentation, writing, and strong cast of characters, it further solidifies an already strong narrative foundation set by the base game, while providing a glimpse of what could be expected from a sequel, which would in turn become Horizon Forbidden West. Were it its own game, it would be worthy of standing shoulder to shoulder with either of them.